Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, boa tarde, good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Sainty and I am the British Ambassador to Portugal. And it's a great pleasure to welcome all those of you who are here in person in Lisbon this afternoon, but also the audience that is joining us via the live stream. The British Embassy in Portugal is playing host this afternoon to a rather special event, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you all the Right Honourable Lord Frost, Minister of State at the UK Cabinet Office. In a moment, I'm going to invite Lord Frost to speak. After the speech, there will be an opportunity for members of the audience here for 15 minutes or so to put some questions to Lord Frost. But before that, I would like to give you a little more background on Lord Frost. He joined the British Diplomatic Service in 1987, serving in Nicosia, Brussels, New York, and Paris, before becoming British Ambassador to Denmark from 2006 to 2008. He returned to London for a variety of jobs, including Director for Europe at the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills, the British government's most senior trade policy official. In 2013, he left the diplomatic service to take up the position of CEO of the Scotch Whisky Association, but returned to the Foreign Office as Special Advisor to the then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson in 2016. After a brief period as the CEO of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, he became the British government's chief negotiator in the negotiations which led to the EU-UK withdrawal agreement, and then led the UK side in the negotiations which resulted in the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. He became a member of the House of Lords in 2020 and was appointed Minister of State at the Cabinet Office and a full member of Boris Johnson's cabinet in March of this year. In his current role, he is responsible for managing the UK-EU relationship, coordination of cross-government positions on trade, and the development of the British government's work on maximising the economic and political opportunities arising from EU exit. Lord Frost, thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a pleasure to be here today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. A year and a half ago, in the days immediately after the UK finally left the EU, I went to Brussels to give a speech which attracted some attention at the time. And I called it Reflections on the Revolutions in Europe. That was a deliberate nod, of course, to the Irish-British scholar-politician Edmund Burke and his critique as regards the French Revolution of what we would now call the hyper-rationalist creation of a new legal order, in contrast to organic, custom-based change. So my title today, which is, for those who missed it, Observations on the Present State of the Nation, is a similarly deliberate echo of Burke's first significant work. There was a pamphlet with that title from 1789. And in it, he reviewed the economic condition of Britain and France, the two superpowers of their day, and first developed his thought that he developed in work subsequently that, and I quote, politics should be adjusted not to human reasonings, but to human nature. People must be governed in a manner agreeable to their temper and disposition, end quote. That observation is particularly relevant to one very significant problem between us and the European Union. I mean, of course, Northern Ireland, which I will come to. But I also want to develop the thought more broadly in today's speech. Nearly 2 years after we left the EU, nearly a year after leaving the transition period, having delivered Brexit despite all the predictions to the contrary, where do things now stand? What is Britain's worldview now? Where do we plan to take the country as a government? What is the state of the relationship with the EU? And frankly, what can be done to improve it? You may wonder why I've come to Portugal to say this. Famously, of course, Portugal is our oldest ally, and no British minister visits Portugal without recalling, and rightly so, the 1386 Treaty of Windsor. But there's more to be said about that old alliance, and in saying it, we see something about the present as well as the past. That's because that alliance rapidly became part of a pattern, one that reflected geography and fundamental interests, and a pattern which is still relevant today. So I mentioned in that Brussels speech 18 months ago that I have a personal interest in the history and art of Belgium and the Netherlands, particularly Flanders. And indeed, when I delivered it, I was about to visit a blockbuster exhibition about the great Flemish painter Jan van Eyck. He's an interesting figure because in the 15th century, artists had to be diplomats as well. And in fact, nearly 600 years ago, in 1428 to be precise, Van Eyck was here where we stand in Lisbon, en mission from the Duke of Burgundy, to paint a picture of the Princess Isabella, daughter of the King of Portugal, João de Boa Memória, as the Duke was interested in marrying her to cement his own alliance with Portugal. And actually, amazingly, an account of that mission survives in the Brussels archives, and I have a copy myself. It describes how the mission also stopped off in England, an ally of Burgundy as well as of Portugal, and then got stuck there for 6 weeks. Clearly, challenges to our transport infrastructure are not a new problem. Sadly, Van Eyck's painting is lost, but the marriage happened, and we can see beginning to develop in this incident a web of maritime and Atlantic interests. England, the Low Countries, Portugal, and others that flourished in the years to come. And indeed, that Atlantic perspective, an essential part of Europe's history, has proved remarkably durable over the years. So that's what we now call geopolitics. And that's why I'm here in Portugal in particular. Geopolitics has become important again. Location matters. I'm not the only one to make this point. Your own former Europe Minister, Bruno Massais, does as well, as of course does President von der Leyen herself. And now, as we look at Europe from the UK, now that we've left the EU and its rules, the geopolitics of Britain's position as an offshore island with particular allies but global interests come back to the forefront. What are the implications for us? In answering that question, I want to make 5 points. First, to say that Brexit has changed our international interests and hence will change our patterns of European relationships. Not necessarily fundamentally, but significantly. Second, that Brexit means competition. We will be setting a different path on economic policy. Third, that Brexit was about democracy. It's a democratic project that's bringing politics back home. Fourth, that the EU and we have got into a low equilibrium, somewhat fractious relationship, but that it need not always be like that, but also that it takes two to fix it. And fifth, and finally, that fixing the very serious problem we have in the Northern Ireland Protocol is a prerequisite for getting to that better place. So let me take these points in turn. First, self-evidently, our international interests have changed after Brexit, and so have our pattern of European relationships. Most obviously, we no longer have an interest in coalition building across the EU to shape EU rules. Relative power within the EU is important to countries which are members of the EU and not to those which aren't. Of course, we take a strong interest in what happens within the European Union. We want the member states of the EU to be prosperous and successful. We will watch how you legislate and whether you can develop effective frameworks for new areas of economic and scientific activity. We look with fascination at debates that in some ways echo ours, like that in Poland, Germany, possibly even now France, about the role of the Court of Justice. But we cannot affect those outcomes except by example, and it would not be correct for us to try. And that makes a huge difference to how we look at things. In contrast, relationships with countries with which we trade directly, countries with maritime connections to us, customs practicalities to deal with, energy connections to us, are going to be particularly important in future. That means, at a minimum, that the whole Atlantic littoral, including Portugal, of course, is going to be of renewed significance for us. And that has already been very clear to us in some of the debates we've had since the start of this year. Equally important are relationships with countries which are particularly central to our geopolitical aims and alliances. That is because, despite the Indo-Pacific tilt, despite the broader perspective that global Britain must and will have, the hard business of European defence, backed by resources, by deterrence, by sharing of risks, remains vital to us. Indeed, that's why we're putting more money into defence, exceeding the baseline NATO target and reaching 2.3% of GDP this year. So Brexit will likely strengthen our interest in deep engagement with the traditionally more transatlanticist countries like Portugal, but also the countries in Central and Eastern Europe that bear the direct burden of the pressure from Russia, which is why we take a particular interest in working with the Baltics, with Poland, and in new concepts that we see developing like the Three Seas initiative. It also means that despite the very visible current difficulties, we'll always look to have a constructive and productive relationship with France. Indeed, one of the reasons why we have such strong military ties with France is, I think, in part, that we both hold a view that the defence of Europe also depends on our willingness and our readiness to act beyond the continent of Europe itself. There is, of course, no contradiction between these deep relationships based on fundamental interests and pursuing our own prosperity in our own way. And that's the second point I want to make. I said just now that our influence on the EU now comes through the power of example, and hence also through a healthy degree of competition. Brexit is about doing things differently, not for the sake of it, but because it suits us and because it creates a greater variety of alternative futures. History shows us that it's genuine competition, regulatory and commercial, between states, which has typically been the most reliable driver of innovation and progress. That's why what some people call, I quote, hard Brexit, in its original sense of leaving the EU customs union and single market, was essential. It was the only form of Brexit that allowed us freedom to experiment and freedom to act. That is already happening, and I think you can see some themes emerging reflecting our different policy preferences in the UK. One is our renewed emphasis on the modern use of science, on the benefits of research. We've set up our own pure research organisation, our ARIA, like the US ARPA, and on a proportionate approach to risk. We recognise that zero-risk systems are a myth and, in fact, sometimes totemise particular aspects of broad societal challenges. So on COVID, there is a balance between opening up and managing the health burden. And we have made a set of choices now, which I believe we can and must stick to, which recognise the risks to society of not opening up. Indeed, arguably Britain, or at least England, is now the freest country in Europe in this respect. We're also going to get moving on areas like cyber, like artificial intelligence, like gene editing. And then even in a prosaic area like border controls, even when our controls are fully in place, we're never going to adopt the same levels of checks and controls that the EU imposes on itself because we don't believe the levels of risk necessarily require them. Another strand is that you can see a more active state, I think, than we've got used to in Britain in recent years, but always working within the confines of a liberal market economy. To take just two examples, we're developing a subsidy policy and framework that's less process-driven, less bureaucratic than the EU's, and more tailored to the specific needs of the UK economy. The state is creating free ports, areas where there are tax reductions aimed at job creation. And finally, we are actively looking at areas where we have inherited EU rules that we regard as unnecessarily complex, bureaucratic, or just unsuited to our present and future needs. A new agriculture support system that's more suited to our climate than the vasty fields of France. New procurement rules, or, since we can see the way the debate is going in the EU on equivalence, reforms to many financial services regulations. In Britain, people voted for change. That's what they expect, and that's what's happening. So to my third point, it's about democracy. Too often the debate about Brexit is technocratic. The merits of one kind of trading arrangement over another, the merits of one visa arrangement over another. Those are important issues, if now largely settled for now. But the fundamental element of the Brexit project is about democracy, to bring home political debates, to allow us to set our own ways of doing things in our own way, to open up the field of political and economic possibility. This is fundamental. In most EU member states, many important things can't be changed through elections. Trade policy, monetary policy, fiscal policy, important elements of immigration policy, indeed some important aspects of industrial policy. That is your choice, and it's not for us to question. But our choice is that our electors should be able to debate and change policy in elections. And those debates are now happening. For example, there have been vigorous debates about the direction of the UK's independent trade policy, with Parliament in particular bringing different viewpoints to the table. We have a very lively discussion of migration policy, freed by the debate over free movement to offer unprecedented immigration and visa schemes to tens of thousands from Hong Kong and more recently, Afghanistan. And indeed, our whole levelling up programme is about the trade-offs between different kinds of economic policy in different parts of the country. And that's why I don't see anything wrong with Brexit being described as a populist policy. If populism means doing what people want, challenging a technocratic consensus, then I'm all for it. To suggest there is something wrong in people deciding things for themselves is somewhat disreputable, maybe even disrespectful to the British people and our democracy. We've always said taking back control is about the ability to make sovereign choices across a range of different areas of national life. It's not about the specifics of those choices. I personally will argue as strongly as I can that free market capitalism, low taxes, free speech, and the maximum possible amount of economic and political freedom for individuals are the best choices we could make as a country. But now we have to win those arguments and persuade people, not just write them into a treaty or into a convention and expect people to put up with them. Indeed, it was arguably the profound sense of democratic estrangement which accompanied the signing of the EU's most recent treaty here in Lisbon, felt acutely, though by no means exclusively in Britain, which made the UK's path towards exiting the European Union perhaps almost an inevitability. So that's what I see going on in Britain. Genuine, far-reaching political argument, sometimes turbulent, but ultimately healthy for our political debate. What then is to be said about my fourth point? Where does this leave our relationship with the EU? On the one hand, despite all the current difficulties that we are familiar with, there has been some good cooperation between us, often at a practical level. We work well together on sanctions policy, for example. I'm sure we could do more together on foreign policy and defence. Customs officials in member states generally work effectively with ours and are pragmatically keeping goods moving, an unsung and very important part of Brexit. And of course, we have comparable climate goals with net zero in mind, though there is a discussion coming, I think, on the EU's plans on CBAMs. But there should be much more to it. The EU is obviously developing as a force in international affairs beyond the traditional areas of economic policy, navigating the rise of China and India and the changing roles of Russia and indeed the US. As it does so, just offshore is a former member with the fifth largest economy in the world, with some of the best universities, a seat on the P5, the biggest defence spender in Europe and a nuclear power, which shares the same fundamental liberal democratic values and the deepest of ties between peoples and cultures. That fact, that reality, can be handled in different ways by the Union. Competition between us, as I said, is likely to be helpful to us both. But alienation, I think, would be a serious historical error. Strategic autonomy, if indeed it can be achieved by the EU, does not need to mean aloofness. The bumpiness of the last 4 years cannot be doubted, but the prize for entering into a new era of relations cannot be doubted either. I am aware, obviously, of the many criticisms that have been made of the UK in these past few years. Yet, viewed from our perspective, we look at the EU and we don't always see an organisation that seems to want to get back to constructive working together. For example, we've seen extreme tensions over the EU's vaccine ban earlier this year, a block on our entry to Horizon so far this year, some threats to our energy supplies through the interconnectors, a needless ban on the import of many shellfish to the EU, causing significant pain to our fishermen, and resort to legal action over Northern Ireland. And overall, we constantly face generalised accusations that we can't be trusted and that we aren't a reasonable international actor. So with all this in mind, we can't help taking it with a bit of a pinch of salt when we're told that the EU has stopped thinking about the UK and it is we who are still obsessed with Brexit. Actually, we're not. There is no electoral dividend in endlessly talking about Brexit, quite the reverse. That's why the Prime Minister barely mentioned it in his party conference speech last week. What we do see instead is an organisation that doesn't always look like it wants us to succeed. We didn't want it to be like this. We just want friendly relations, free trade, and the chance to do things our own way, all within the framework of a meaningful and robust Western alliance. With this in mind, I do urge the EU to look at the image that's being presented to us. If there is a trust problem, as we're constantly told there is, it's not the responsibility of only one party. At some point, we must both try to raise our eyes to the horizon, look at the possibilities for better relations, and try to help each other solve problems, not create them. Which brings me to my fifth and final point, and the biggest current problem between us, the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's the biggest source of mistrust between us, and for all kinds of reasons, we need to fix this problem. I recognise that's not easy. The history here does matter. I do understand why the EU finds it difficult to come back to an agreement that was reached only 2 years ago, though obviously that in itself is far from unusual in international relations. Equally, there's a widespread feeling in the UK that the EU did try to use Northern Ireland to encourage UK political forces to reverse the referendum result, or at least to keep us closely aligned with the EU. And moreover, that the protocol represents a moment of EU overreach when the UK's negotiating hand was tied, and therefore cannot reasonably last in its current form. Whether or not you agree with either of those analyses, the facts on the ground are what matter above all. Maybe there was a world in which the protocol could have worked, more sensitively implemented. But the world has now moved on, and we now face a very serious situation. The protocol is not working. It's completely lost consent in one community in Northern Ireland. It's not doing the thing it was set up to do, protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. In fact, doing the opposite. It has to change. No one here is expert in Northern Ireland, and we're not asking you to be. We're asking you, the EU, to work with us to help us manage the delicate balance in the Belfast Agreement and not to disrupt it, to help us reflect the concerns of everyone in Northern Ireland from all sides of the political spectrum, and to make sure the peace process is not undermined. The key feature of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is balance between different communities and between their links with the rest of the UK and with the Republic of Ireland. That balance is being shredded by the way this protocol is working. The fundamental difficulty is that we're being asked to run a full-scale external boundary of the EU through the centre of our country, to apply EU law without consent in one part of it, and to have any dispute arising from these arrangements settled ultimately in the court of one of the parties. The way this is happening is disrupting ordinary lives, damaging large and small businesses, and causing serious turbulence to the institutions within Northern Ireland. I remind you of Burke's words I quoted at the beginning, and I quote again, "Politics should be adjusted not to human reasonings, but to human nature. People must be governed in a manner agreeable to their temper and disposition." That is why we need to move on from this once and for all, and that simply won't happen without significant change to the existing arrangements. We put forward proposals to fix things in July. They are less than many in Northern Ireland would like to see. They don't sweep away the protocol, they work with the grain of it. They don't require infrastructural checks at the international border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. No one wants this, and we've always opposed it. They keep Irish Sea trade arrangements for goods going into Ireland, and we accept a responsibility to implement EU rules for those goods. They would allow UK and EU standard goods to circulate in Northern Ireland. They protect the EU's single market. But crucially, they would allow goods also to circulate virtually freely between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, something that every other country in the world takes for granted. We're now heading into a crucial few weeks. We await the proposals that are coming tomorrow from Maros Šefčovič and the Commission in response to our ideas. I want to be clear, we'll be really ready to discuss them, whatever they say, and we will obviously consider them seriously, fully, and positively. But I repeat, if we're going to get to a solution, we must collectively deliver significant change. We need the EU to show the same ambition and willingness to tackle the fundamental issues at the heart of the protocol head on. That's why I'm sharing with the Commission today a new legal text, the text of an amended protocol reflecting the proposals in our command paper and supporting, not undermining, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. and I want to comment briefly on a couple of aspects of this text. First of all, the new protocol that we are proposing is forward-looking. The original version was agreed at a time when we didn't know whether there would be a trade agreement between us and the EU. Many of the most unusual and disproportionate provisions were agreed precisely because we didn't know what the shape of our future trading relationship was going to be. In the face of uncertainty, the original protocol defaulted to excessive rigidity which is now needlessly harming Northern Ireland. We now have a very far-reaching agreement between us in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, one which regulates all aspects of our trade in the future. So it makes sense to situate the new agreement in that new trading context and bring it in line with those arrangements. They are, after all, the most significant signed by each party so far. Second, our proposal looks more like a normal treaty in the way it's governed, with international arbitration instead of a system of EU law ultimately policed in the court of one of the parties, the European Court of Justice. I think the Commission have been a bit too quick to dismiss governance as a side issue, and the reality is the opposite. The role of the Court of Justice and the EU institutions in Northern Ireland are creating a situation where there's no discretion about how provisions in the protocol are implemented. The Commission's decision to launch infraction proceedings against us earlier this year at the very first sign of disagreement shows why these arrangements are so hard to make work in practice. But it's not just about the court. It's about the system of which the court is the apex, the system which means the EU can make laws which apply in Northern Ireland without any kind of democratic scrutiny or discussion. None of this, we can now see, will work as part of a durable settlement. Indeed, without new arrangements in this area, no protocol will ever have the support across Northern Ireland it needs to survive. So I do urge Portugal, where I am today, everybody in the EU, to look carefully at what we are proposing, as we will look carefully at what the EU proposes. I ask everyone listening to me today to think again about the positions taken so far. If we can put this protocol onto a durable footing, we've got the opportunity to move past the difficulties of the past year. We have a short but real opportunity to put in place a new arrangement to diffuse the political crisis that is brewing, both in Northern Ireland and between us. If we can work on that, then of course other things become possible too. Other significant problems in the relationship of interest to both sides might become resolvable. We would have a chance to move forward to a new and better equilibrium. The protocol itself envisages it could be superseded by future agreements in its Article 13.8. Given the experience we now have, it's clear that it must be. I ask, what does it cost the EU to put a new protocol in place? So it seems to us very little. There's no threat to the single market from what we are proposing. We're not asking to change arrangements within the EU in any way. We're not seeking to generalise special rules for Northern Ireland to any other aspect of our relationship. And for the EU now to say that the protocol, drawn up in extreme haste at a time of great uncertainty, can never be improved upon, when it's so self-evidently causing such difficult problems, would be a historic misjudgment. It will be to prioritise EU internal processes over relieving turbulence in Northern Ireland, to suggest that societal disruption and trade distortion can be disregarded, and perhaps even that they are an acceptable price for Northern Ireland to pay to demonstrate that, quote, Brexit has not worked. To insist on this route will be to do a great disservice to Northern Ireland and not recognise the process of iterative improvement that has kept the balance and sustained the peace process in Northern Ireland over past decades. Of course, the EU can insist on this, can insist on no change. But if it does, must remember that it is this government, the UK government, that governs Northern Ireland, as it does the rest of the UK. Northern Ireland is not EU territory. It is our responsibility to safeguard peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. And that may include using Article 16 if necessary. We would not go down this road gratuitously or with any particular pleasure. But it is our fundamental responsibility to safeguard peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland, and that is why we cannot rest until this situation has been addressed. The protocol itself is clear. It respects the, quote, essential state functions of the UK. It does not create some kind of co-dominion or co-responsibility with the EU in Northern Ireland. It doesn't allow the EU to develop its own aspirations for Northern Ireland as if it were a member state. For example, to decide that it is in Northern Ireland's own interests to stay subject to the rules of the single market for goods, whatever the UK government may think. In short, the protocol is there to support the peace process. It's there to support the basis, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The Article 16 safeguards are there to deal with the situation if the protocol ceases to provide that support, and we will always act with that in mind. So I repeat to conclude, let us be ambitious. Let's see if we can find a better way forward. Let's agree arrangements which we will both implement and which can in fact be implemented because they command acceptance and respect across Northern Ireland. In short, let's try and get back to normal. With some effort of will, we could still, despite all the problems, be in a position where the poison is drawn from this issue entirely, and it is removed from the diplomatic top table once and for all. And I personally would certainly be happy if I could to come here next year and talk about a new age of cooperation in which the word protocol never appears. Let me return one last time to Burke's pamphlet. He's describing the British government's position at a previous time of deep division in British politics. In fact, it was over policy on America. But his words have resonance to all of us today. And I quote, "A diversity of opinion upon almost every principle of politics had indeed drawn a strong line of separation between them and some others. However, they would desire us not to extend it by unnecessary bitterness. They wished to prevent a difference of opinion from festering into rancorous and incurable hostility. Accordingly, they endeavoured that all past controversies should be forgotten." I think we should act in that spirit. The Western Alliance has got too many global challenges to spend time on internal disputes. We all face the same problems. We all need to stick together if we are to keep counting for something in the rest of the world and making a difference. That is what we will work for. That's what this government will work for. And we hope it can be a genuinely common effort. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, once again, and thank you, Lord Frost, for those words. Now we have an opportunity for up to 15 minutes to take some questions from the floor in relation to Lord Frost's speech. So please do put your hands up if you would like to ask a question. And then we'll make sure that a microphone makes its way to you. And then when it comes to ask a question, you can take your mask off, of course, and then please state your name and your position or role that you're coming from. Okay, let's go to Antonio first.
Good afternoon, Minister. 1 week ago or so, you just mentioned more or less what you just added today, that you would trigger Article 16 in case that the smooth trade with Northern Ireland would not be viable from a European Union side. Was that a concrete threat? You intend to take it in front in case you don't agree with tomorrow's proposals?
As I said, Article 16 is part of the protocol. It's a legitimate tool within the protocol, and indeed, of course, the EU has sought to use it, however briefly, itself earlier this year. It's not what we would prefer to do. You know, we would much prefer to find a consensus on this subject. That's absolutely clear. And as I said, of course, we will look seriously at what the Commission proposes. I know that a lot of effort will have gone into what we get tomorrow from the Commission. We take that very seriously. We will, of course, look at it seriously, and we very much want to get into talks about it, as well as what we have put on the table. So that is the best way forward. If we can find consensus, that is much better for everybody. But it's got to be a consensus that deals with the situation. If it doesn't, there are other tools in the protocol, but let's try the first best first.
Thank you, Lord Frost. Okay, we'll take two questions and then, so let's go first to Pedro and then to Katarina.
Minister. Thank you. Oh yeah, thank you, Minister. Regarding the common challenges that you mentioned that the Western Alliance must face together, how do you feel that the events of the last month geopolitically have affected mutual trust?
So I think there are various events happened in the last month. So I guess it depends which one you may be referring to. I think countries determine their own interests in collaboration with their friends and allies, and I think that task of building trust is one that's got to be constantly renewed, and everybody needs to take part in it. So that's what we would aim to achieve, and I'm sure it's what our friends and allies aim to achieve and aim to do as we move on from the events of the last month.
Okay, next to Katerina.
Thank you very much. Katerina Demoni from Reuters News Agency. Minister, I'm curious to know, why did you decide to deliver this speech now? I mean, the EU is going to announce tomorrow proposals for the Northern Ireland Protocol. They said that the proposal is very far-reaching. That's the EU's words. Why did you decide to do it now? Why not wait until they announce their proposal? Was this a warning to the EU before they announced their proposal? Thank you so much.
So I think it's possible to kind of overinterpret diplomatic timetables. We felt this was the right moment to set out our position nearly 3 months after setting out the command paper, and because we knew this was going to be a big few weeks on the protocol. We know we're getting the Commission proposals tomorrow. I hope we can get into discussion about them quite quickly and intensively over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we felt the right thing was to make our view heard and to get across the balance of what we were trying to say, the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in our thinking and the peace process, and the overriding responsibility we've got to protect that and ensure stability, prosperity, security in Northern Ireland. This felt like a good moment.
Okay, let's go with the gentleman to the next to Katerina, who asked the last question.
Peter Wise, Financial Times. Could you clarify if the new protocol that you're putting forward would eliminate all checks on trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Or would you be prepared to accept some checks?
So it does, without getting too much into technicalities, it does what we said we would commit to in the command paper in July. That is, provides for an extremely sort of light touch scheme, a one-off process for traders in Great Britain who want to move goods in and out of Northern Ireland, much, much lighter than now. And also that we will continue to enforce the single epidemiological unit, as we say, of Northern Ireland, of Ireland overall, with the checks and processes that were in place before we left the EU and the transition period. So I think that's why I said in the speech, it's important to see that we're trying to work with the grain of the protocol, but we're trying to design it in a way that allows goods to flow freely where they need to flow freely and avoid undermining the balance that the Good Friday Agreement is designed to establish.
Okay, let's go first with the gentleman behind the person who asked the last one, and then we'll go to the gentleman in the back.
João Tiago, ITV News. You signed up for the deal, and actually the Prime Minister sold it to British people at the general election as an excellent deal. So the thing is, did you ever intend to honor the terms of this deal, or did the British government sign it in bad faith?
So we always sign treaties in good faith. and intend to implement them. I hope that's a given about the way we behave. We knew, as we said in our command paper, and the introduction to it sets out the arguments here at some length. We knew that some aspects of the protocol as it stood when they were agreed in October 2019, we knew that these were problematic. We didn't particularly support them ourselves. We agreed with them because it was the right thing to do for the country overall, looking at the wider political debate and the need to deliver on Brexit. We knew we were taking a risk, and we hoped that we'd be wrong and that the protocol would work effectively. It turned out we were right. These were risky proposals, and they haven't worked as most people hoped, and that's why we've got to come back to them. And it doesn't seem unreasonable to us to look at an agreement again if it is obviously not doing what it was designed to achieve. That feels like the normal thing to do in those circumstances.
Okay, we've got time for one or two more. First, gentleman at the back, and then we'll come to you, sir.
Hello. Hi, Lord Frost. It's Joe Mays from Bloomberg. Would you be prepared to risk a trade war with the EU by triggering Article 16? And would such a trade war be worth it over an issue such as ECJ governance of the...
So there's obviously a couple of hypotheticals in there before we get to that point. I've said what I've said, I think, about Article 16 and the circumstances in which we would use it. Obviously, it would be for the EU to decide whether it made sense to retaliate and get into those circumstances. I don't think it would make the situation any better by doing so. It won't help the situation in Northern Ireland, which is what this is all about. But obviously, that's not in our hands. There are several stages in this process where everybody can look carefully at it and decide to pull back from the brink, and perhaps that might be one of them if we're in those circumstances. But it's obviously not our decision.
Thank you, Lord Frost. And the final question from the gentleman here at the front.
Mr. Minister, my name is José Sousa Dias from the Portuguese news agency. Can you explain a little bit what are the main differences between the old protocol and the new protocol that Britain is going to present?
So what we have proposed, I mean, I don't know what the EU is going to come forward with, though, as I said, I look at it positively, and what we hear about it is interesting. We'll talk about it, even though if I fear it may not do the job first round. What we are proposing is arrangements where goods can move around the United Kingdom more or less freely, which is after all a fairly normal thing, that EU goods can nevertheless circulate in Northern Ireland, even though they wouldn't normally meet UK standards, if that's what economic actors in Northern Ireland would prefer in particular circumstances, and that the governance should be by what's normal in international agreements, international arbitration, which is the right way of solving disputes in this very sensitive circumstance. So those are the key points. We don't think any of them are unreasonable. We think many of them are quite normal for a country, and that we believe they are good compromise proposals that have a chance of settling this problem for good, delivering significant change and making things better for everybody in Northern Ireland. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lord Frost, for joining us today on this sunny afternoon in Lisbon. And thank you all very much for joining us too. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.